Welcome to another edition of Futurartist Records Presents. Today I've got the opportunity to sit down with an artist who has 15 #1 Billboard hits, has been nominated for 3 or 4 Grammys. He's a producer, he's a songwriter, he's a musician, he does it all, and he's a nice guy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Darren Rahn.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, thanks for coming up.
It's good to be here.
Good.
It's my pleasure.
You just got back from an interview, and now we're dragging you into this one, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. We talked on the phone, and you've got a lot of stories to tell, and you've been involved with a lot of things. A lot of things.
A few little things here and there.
You never sleep, I think. You probably feel like you never sleep. Why don't you give us a really quick rundown of your history of music growing up?
For me, we lived in a musical family. So mom and dad both did music, and when we were young, you know, we sang. The 3 kids and mom and dad, we sang in a gospel group at church. And when we were, I think, 5 years old, mom said, I have a twin brother and a sister who's about 1.5 years younger, and you know, mom said, hey, when you're 5 years old, you've got to take piano for 2 years, and if you want to pursue it after that, you know, that's your choice, and if you don't want to do it anymore, that's your choice. So I took piano for 2 years, and that was it. I had, you know, I wanted a typical kid, right? Yeah. I'd rather be outside playing, right. And but I loved music. So I did the 2 years, took a little break, and then in grade school, when it was time for band, I think 4th grade, beginning band, I thought, oh yeah, I might be interested in doing that, and so took up clarinet at that point. Okay. And played that for a couple years. I always wanted to play saxophone. They told me when I started that my fingers were too short. So then I said, well, I want to play trombone. They said, well, your arms are too short. You won't be able to reach 7th position. Right. And I said, well, how about drums? And mom and dad said, no drums. Yeah. The guy at the music store was a clarinetist. And so he picked up his clarinet and played Peter and the Wolf. What is that, Prokofiev, I think? And a very, very fine player. And so mom and dad heard the clarinet and said, oh, you're going to play clarinet? And I thought, oh, no. So I did 2 years of it. I suffered through 2 years. And don't get me wrong, I love good clarinet, but you know, it was a difficult instrument for me. And I stuck with it for 2 years. And then when they had an opening in jazz band for baritone saxophone. Okay. And I took it. I would finally get to play saxophone, and it was as big as I was. Right. Yeah. So that the rest is history. I mean, from there on out, junior high, high school, and then into college, I knew that's what I wanted to do. Yeah, that's cool. Now, how did you decide on the saxophone? I always wanted to play saxophone.
Always liked it.
Yeah, I loved it. And then I think, you know, as a kid, a lot of the songs that I liked had saxophone in it. Okay. And then, you know, Dude on the Muppet Show. Sure. You know, he was fun to listen to. You know, you ask saxophone players, they might not all admit it. I think saxophone players and drummers, you know, Animal playing the drums.
Oh yeah, you can't beat it.
The sax player, I don't even know if he had a name. Right. He was just the sax
But he presented it well enough to hook you. Yeah.
But I liked the sound of the saxophone. Sure. You know, when I hear it on records and stuff like that, and so it just caught my interest. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. How did you transition from clarinet to saxophone? Is it just kind of a natural switch to you, or you were just like, it's the next step, so I'm taking it? No, actually, it's a really easy transition, because the lower octave, or I'm sorry, the higher octave of the clarinet and the saxophone share almost the same fingerings. Oh, okay. And really the difference being, I think saxophone is an easier instrument to generate sound on and to become proficient on. For a number of reasons, and so the transition from clarinet to sax was not just easy, but life was good. That's cool. Yeah. Now, when you got out of high school, you went to college. You went to a couple different colleges. Mm-hmm. What did you go to college for, and what did you end up coming out of it with? Well, so my dream and passion was always playing the saxophone, and so my hope was, hey, I'd love to try to turn this into a career. Mm-hmm. But I also knew that, you know, especially undergrad, a bachelor's degree in performance doesn't get you, you know, you can't go teach. You don't need a piece of paper to perform. Right. And so I thought, well, why don't I get the education degree to fall back on if I need. And So I did. I did 5 years. I got my bachelor's in education, music ed, and but what I did at that time was I locked myself in the practice room for 4 to 6, sometimes 8 hours a day.
Wow.
And worked on the performance, so that then moving into grad school, I went and focused on saxophone, classical and jazz.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what colleges did you go to for each of that? Did you do one for your education and one for the...
Yeah, my bachelor's was from Adams State College, which is now Adams State University.
Okay.
So I guess they've grown a little.
Upgraded?
Yes. I don't know how that works.
Right.
But now it's...
Sounds like it anyway.
Yeah, now it's apparently a bigger deal now.
Okay. All right.
But the idea was to be at a... I had that choice to go into a huge music program or a smaller one, and for me, I decided that it was really the hands-on time that I needed. I needed hands-on time on my horn.
Yeah.
And so I did my bachelor's there, and then I went and did my master's and part of a doctorate up at UNC in Greeley.
Yeah.
So University of Northern Colorado, of course, they've got a great music program, and I learned so much there.
Yeah, they've got their jazz program is amazing. Yeah. So you also produce as well as play. How do you approach your projects? Being a musician and a producer and a writer and everything.
It's funny. Probably in the early years, I approached things more as a saxophonist, as a player, and then of course I've done a lot of production over the years. And I think I'm hitting that point in my career. People have asked me before, what's more prominent, the artist or the producer? And I think at this point, I might actually say they're almost very, very difficult to separate. Really? Yeah. But if I'm working on a record, I'm approaching things to serve the music, but I'm probably thinking as a producer. Right. Until I pick up the horn, which at that point, if I've done my job right producing the music, by the time I pick up my horn to record my part, I should be able to let go of the details and just be playing music. If I'm on a gig playing saxophone, then my mind is totally in that space. Yeah, totally free. Do you feel like when you're working on your own stuff, you're thinking on both tracks at the same time? Or do you try to write and be creative and then go back and do the back end of it? Or probably earlier in my career it was laying the foundation with the production, and then kind of as an artist coming in over top of it. And these days, once again, I think they're kind of a little more intertwined than that. It's I've done it for long enough now that there's the big picture of what something's going to be is probably have a more accurate view now. Right. Or in some cases, in many cases, part of that process though also is letting go of the music and letting the music happen. Correct. So, right. Which, if we get into more of the production stuff, or even live gigs, that stuff, it's critical to serve the music and not always have that preconceived idea in your head of what something's supposed to be. Right. Right. I think the best stuff happens when it's supposed to. Yeah. That brings me to, I watched an interview you did on LA Talk. I think probably right before you got on a plane and came back here for this. And they had mentioned all the great artists that are here in Colorado, which you and I had talked about. There's so many great musicians out here and people don't think about it. Well, it's Colorado. Who are some of the artists you've worked with, and as a performer and as production, that are Colorado? Well, I mean, just even talking about who are the musicians in Colorado, and in my genre, contemporary jazz, my gosh, 15 years ago, it was like saxophone central around here. Right. I mean, we had, of course we have Nelson Rangel, who's a staple in Colorado, has been, and he performs internationally. But you've got Dotsero with Steve Watts, you've got Gerald Albright, Warren Hill was living here back at that time I was here. And I mean, it was like saxophone central. Yeah. and now still Gerald's still here, Nelson, myself. So and I've had a chance to work with Nelson as a producer, and we've played together a few times over the years. I really admire his playing. Yeah. And Gerald, I grew up listening to Gerald. I mean, he's one of my favorite saxophonists of all time, and he's just I remember in 1990, early 90s, back when they would play jazz on the radio. He
Yeah.
did a recording at Birdland, live at
Oh,
Birdland,
yeah.
Birdland West. His version
Wow.
of Georgia on My Mind, one of the greatest recordings, my favorite of all time. And I would hear that song on mainstream jazz radio
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 times a day, you know.
Did that change the way you approached your playing or your producing?
Of course, yeah.
Having those people to,
Oh, yeah.
to reference and
I grew up
idolize?
in a small town, so I
Yeah.
mean, I was originally from a farm in Canada.
Okay.
Okay, that's where I grew
Okay.
up, and then coming into the U.S. and then I've been in I was in Southern Colorado through junior high, high school, and my undergrad. So being a little more isolated geographically,
Yeah.
you rely on these recordings
Yeah.
and listening to these guys to kind of influence, your own playing.
Do you think you've achieved where you were headed with that, or are you are you never there?
I think it's further than I ever expected.
Yeah.
You always have dreams of being able to go and do this for a living, and I've been blessed. The production thing was unexpected. I always thought I would just be a saxophonist, and so that was kind of my journey. And then, as I got into recording and production, and I know we were going to dive into that in a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
When that door opened, that's actually what opened the door for me as an artist. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the guys I grew up listening to, and they were my heroes, are now my peers and my friends,
Yeah.
and I've had a chance to work with many of them.
Does that ever seem surreal?
Totally surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you still get starstruck?
I've never been a starstruck kind of
Okay.
guy. I think that we're all just people, right? And
Yeah.
we all put on our pants 2 legs at a
Yeah.
time, just like the other guy. And so, what impresses me is people's character. So I remember in college listening to Gerald Albright and Kirk Whalum, and if we talk about some of my earlier influences, of course it was straight ahead stuff, John Coltrane,
Okay.
Dexter Gordon,
Yeah.
the tenor guys.
Yeah.
I've always been a tenor guy. And then moving forward into the contemporaries, like I said, Kirk Whalum, Gerald Albright, David Sanborn, Dave Koz, Grover Washington Jr. These guys really were a big part of forming who I was. And then through this series of incredible events, I'm getting to work with a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's really been amazing.
Calling out maybe. Have you been impressed or let down by any of them as people outside? You listen to them, you admire what they do, you get to work with them, and you're like, oh, this isn't what I thought. Or you're like, wow, this guy's amazing.
Actually, the guys that I just mentioned, and the fact that their names keep coming out of my mouth is probably an indication that I look up to them. And the guys I mentioned are all really great guys. But
Cool.
of course, every once in a while you run into that, to the person who thinks very highly of themselves and
Right.
everything surrounding themselves. And I mean, for me, that's just a learning experience. For me,
Sure.
that was a reminder, hey, don't become like that.
Right. Right.
On the flip side, guys like Kirk or Gerald or Dave, who are amazing musicians, but also really kind individuals too.
We had talked about your, quote, Denver to #1 journey. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And you've got 15 #1s, but your first #1 wasn't your music.
No, I had been like many musicians. When I left school, I was working hard, man. I was gigging several nights a week, anything I could, teaching lessons, writing charts for people, whatever I needed to do to get by. And I had done that for almost 15 years. And I hit a point where I was feeling like I'm not looking for stardom. I mean, I've never been that guy, but I was looking for stability.
Right.
And the music industry is a hard place to find that. And so I thought,
on many
okay,
levels.
and I had started dabbling in recording and production, and I had done my own album with my brother, and I'd done some work for a few friends. I think at that time Nelson Rangel and I did 1 or 2 songs together. And I'd kind of formed a little studio in my basement. But I hit that point where I knew something had to change. And so I was kind of on that cusp of, okay, am I going to be able to convert this into a real career?
Right.
So I sent out, I set up a little one-page web page with a picture and a few MP3s, and I found a link and I sent it to some record executives, the emails, and most of them blocked me. they reported my DarrenRahn.com, anything. They reported me to the spam list. So for years, I couldn't send email. I wouldn't even have been able to send you an email from that email address because it would block me. But I guess they have limits. So now I'm good.
You're good now. Yeah.
But I didn't hear back from any of the labels except one label, a small label in LA that had just begun, and the head of that label sent me an email back and said they enjoyed the music, and little did I know that one of the three business partners in that label was Dave Koz.
Oh, wow.
So the next day I get my phone rings and I see 818, so I knew it was LA, and I answered, "Hey Darren, this is Dave Koz." And I thought, what's Dave Koz calling me for? And,
right.
And turns out he was partner in the label. They liked the music. They invited me to LA to, a couple months later, they wanted to look at signing me. And so I meet with the label. They love the record. Everything's looking good. And they said, "Hey, listen, Darren, we're a brand new label and we're small, and we just signed a brand new saxophone player who's young, like you, and we just we don't have the means to do two of you guys right now, and we're kind of bummed because we love your record." Right. And so my dreams were kind of dashed, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I can, how many more times can I go through this, right? So they said, the head of the label said, "Hey, we love your production. If we had some production work for you, would you be open?" And I said, "Sure." Interesting. So little do I know, they overnight my record to a gentleman named Wayman Tisdale. Now Wayman, he was in the NBA. He was on the Dream Team with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and all those guys when they went to the Olympics. Yeah. Wayman was one of the leading rebounders in NBA history. Fantastic ball player, but many people didn't know he was even a better musician than he was a ball player. So when he retired from the NBA, he had become quite a notable solo artist. They said, "Hey, we overnighted your album to Wayman, and he loves it, and he wants you to produce his next radio single." Oh my gosh. And so they suggested the song, and it was a remake of the old hit "Ain't No Stopping Us Now." And 9 or 10 weeks later, something like that, it was #1 on Billboard. You know, it was incredible. I had never, totally out of left field, because here I am thinking saxophone, 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 and then they say, "We'd like your production." But the good news is I got to play saxophone on it. Right. And all the stuff I did with Wayman, they let me play saxophone on. And then before I knew it, I had record labels contacting me saying, "Hey, are you signed? We'd like to sign you as an artist." Oh my gosh. So, that opportunity with Wayman opened the doors. So Dave and Wayman were I'm so grateful to them. I mean, and I learned so much about creating music from them, and not trying to force things, not trying to make things happen, but letting things happen naturally. Had you had enough doing your own stuff and doing some smaller production stuff, did you feel like you were prepared to step into that role, or were you kind of like, I have to say yes, so I guess I'll figure it out? No, I would not have said yes if I didn't feel confident I could deliver. I always believe in preparation. Yeah. And of course, those 15 years leading up to that, wondering if I'd ever have an opportunity, it was preparation after preparation after preparation. Even leaving for LA, I felt like, I know I need to bring my saxophone because they might ask me to play to make sure that, that I'm really for real. Yeah, it's really exactly. But in the back of my mind, I thought, let me bring my laptop and my little recording setup, portable setup. Let me just bring that just in case. And that's what landed me the gig. When they mentioned to me that Wayman was interested in doing this song, I actually went back to my hotel room that night and sketched together a little clip of "Ain't No Stopping Us Now," and they had invited me to a venue the next night for one of their concerts for one of their artists, and I handed them the CD with the little clip on it, and they all disappeared, and they went to the car and listened and came back in, and they said, where where did you do this? What studio did you record this at? I said, no, I just did this in my hotel room last night. And that sealed the deal.
Wow.
So those little moments of preparation, yeah, they're huge.
Yeah. You know, my dad always told me success is when preparedness and opportunity meet. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
You know, you were far enough ahead in your thinking that,
well, and
getting
to that point, Michael, you know, I had a great musician when I was young, a great trumpet player named Phil Driscoll. He used to tour with Joe Cocker, and he was very well known back in the day. But I had an interaction with him, and I asked him, I said, if you could just give me one piece of advice, what would it be? He said, Darren, that's easy. He said, never look for the big door to open. Just every time the small door opens, just go through it and do it with excellence. And, you know, be the guy that they want to call back. Right. And so it was 15 years of that with seemingly no end in sight. And then this one opportunity, and let me be clear, this opportunity to produce for Wayman, yeah, in retrospect, it was a big opportunity, but it presented itself in a very grassroots level way. It's like, okay, you know, we don't have a ginormous budget. Mm-hmm. We have a really short time frame. We also have high expectation.
Right.
And so it was one of those situations where, you know, I knew I had to take it and I knew I had to deliver. But it was that 15 years of just doing the little things that prepared me for it.
Right, right.
You know.
Yeah, yeah. They say there's no overnight success.
No.
So your Denver to #1 was 15 years in the making, and you ended up going to LA to
professionally 15. Yeah, but if you count the 18, what was it? 18 years of education before that. You know.
Yeah.
And then the extra. Most of my preparation was not just the schooling. It was after hours. You know, when I was in undergrad, you know, I was buying keyboards and old step sequencers, and I was staying up, you know, till 2, 3 in the morning every night, learning how to use these electronics, and if you're able to create music with those limited resources nowadays with computers and the technology at our fingertips, it's a cakewalk. You can do
amazing things. Yeah. Did you kind of fine-tune your craft by imitating other artists, the artists you looked up to, or did you always try to do your own thing, or how did that work?
Imitating other artists was learning. That was learning my craft. But I never wanted to be someone else. I remember early in my undergrad, I bumped into a great jazz musician who came through to clinic at our school, and he and I were talking, and he walked up to me in the middle of our day, and he just simply said to me, Darren, he said, if you don't have a voice, you're not welcome to this conversation. And it hit me so hard, and
wow.
I you know, I took it pretty hard.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But I thought about that for years, and it started to make sense to me. Anyone can imitate.
Right.
But very few can actually create and have a voice. And so I started on that journey early. Rather than trying to be the guy that was playing a million miles an hour,
right.
I was sitting there trying to find out what my voice was on the saxophone. And so by the time I reached working with Wayman and Dave Koz, at that point, no, I wasn't thinking about imitation at all. I was always thinking about moving forward, always thinking about creating something unique.
So you've had some really good advice over the years, and some stuff that maybe a lot of people either miss or just aren't exposed to. Even if you don't realize it right at the time. Yeah. You know, you can look back and go, oh yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah, well, and for me, probably the biggest lesson is, you know, we know you got to be able to work with others.
Yes.
And teamwork. Yeah. I mean, people would like to, so many people want to take credit for what they've done and what they've, you know, we're all a byproduct of something that's come before us.
Yes.
Our family, our history, you know, the gifts that God has given us. A lot of people want to take credit for. I have friends that are so innately talented. I mean, you know, those musicians, they can hear it and it's automatic. Yeah. That's not the way it was for me.
Right.
But there's that gift that's been planted inside of them. They've had it their whole life. And yeah, they have spent time working hard and developing, but it's teamwork, you know. no one wants to be that guy that gets to the top alone.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And from the ground up is teamwork, starting at home, your family, you know, moving into the music industry, the people around you. A lot of people, you know, you mentioned, you know, Grammy nominations and Billboard #1s, and I mean, these things are great, but there's, in every single one of those situations, there's a team there. There's a, you know, even if I create, say for my own song, even if I create all the music myself and I write the song and I record it, well, then I hire a bass player to play on it. Well, he brings something, you know, to the party. My good friend Mel Brown, he's Denver native. He's now in Phoenix. He's probably played on more radio hits than we could count.
Oh, wow.
But what he brings to the table, other musicians, and then, you know, you're promoting it and you send it to a radio promoter, what they bring to the party. It's a collaborative effort all the way around.
Yeah, and just someone's face ends up being on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you find that you learn, no matter what step in the process, you learn something from the people who are involved?
If I'm smart, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true, though. Yeah, you do. You need to pay attention. You need to absorb everything you can.
When I look at the early parts of, like, when I first produced that song for Wayman, and now I look, you know, the last 15 years since, what's happened during that time, I remember going through that process with him and working with a couple other artists, and then I did a single for Dave Koz. And when we were in the studio working together, both Wayman and Dave, it was the same thing. When something came out naturally, my first inclination was, oh, that's great, let's perfect it. And oftentimes Wayman or Dave would say, no. That's what it's supposed to be. Leave it.
Interesting.
Oh, but I can improve it. No, Darren.
Yeah.
It's what it's supposed to be. Don't mess with it. So knowing when to mess with it, and when not to mess with it, is huge. And if you don't know, probably don't mess with it. Let it be and let it happen naturally. Don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Right. Because then it turns into something that
and don't suck the life out of a good piece of music.
Right.
And so a lot of people will say, well, gosh, it's so tedious. And this. I thought, well, not always so much. I mean, if you just work with good people and let everyone bring to the party what they're gifted at, and don't try to micromanage it. And if you're wise in getting the right combination of people, you just let it happen.
Yeah. Talking mostly about jazz, what other genres have you worked with? What other type of people have you worked with? And do you find that it gets less tedious the higher up on the experience and
you know, some artists, their experience, you understand, okay, I get it. I get why this person has been so successful. But I mean, good people are good people. Now, I've done a lot of outside of contemporary jazz. I've done a lot of gospel, a fair amount of R&B, some hip hop, some rock, even a few times I think a little country. Yeah. So a whole variety of stuff. But I had an opportunity to work with Toby Keith, and that was via Wayman. It was a collaboration that he and Wayman did. And let's see, I recently mixed a song for the BET Soul Train Awards. That was with Kirk Franklin and Estelle and Rose Summers and I think Chelsea Green, violin player. And I've done, let's see, who else? Jeffrey Osborne, Phil Perry, a few of these guys that cross over into kind of soul and R&B. So I've had a good cross section. A good friend of mine was did this band from Chicago called Bellevue Suite. Oh, cool. And great musicians. These guys were phenomenal. And the drummer, not a guy, the drummer was a girl, and she's a dear friend of mine. She ended up being Prince's drummer here for the last 5 or 6 years before he passed away. And so to see, and that was like, when I met her, that was hard rock. It was, I was producing hard rock for them. Wow. So it's been a really neat journey.
That's cool. Do you keep an archive of the things you've worked on? Some people I know hang on to it. Some people don't.
Not well enough. Yeah. I mean, I think I have sessions backed up at home. So if people ever ask me, I can go back and look and pretty much find everything I've done there. But you know, I generally am always thinking about moving forward.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
I don't want to be that musician, and I've run into several like this, that they're always talking about their glory days. You know, I think we go through times of plenty and we go through times of struggle, but they're all a part of our story. You know, I'll forever be thankful to Wayman, and how that changed the face of my career. But it hasn't been like that every day since. I mean, you go through those times, and you maybe you get a Grammy nomination or a #1, and then maybe you go a few years without it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I had a good lesson. I had my first #1 right off the bat, and then it took me another 5 years of prolific work before I saw another #1.
Oh wow!
And so it
So
made
you learned
me,
it really quickly.
It made me realize,
Yeah.
that first one that came pretty easy, you know.
Yeah, it wasn't rapid fire, which you learn a lot by that.
Yeah, and the second one, man, it was a lot of work to get to the second one.
Yeah.
But that time, that 5 years between the first and the second #1, made me realize, okay, I shouldn't be working for the #1. I should just be working to do good music, and then it's going to do what it's going to do.
Right, right.
Yeah.
You wear many hats. You've done all sorts of different things, and so I don't know what point this happened, but you're doing so many things that you decided you needed to recruit some help, and you ended up recruiting a fellow musician. Which she also happens to be your wife.
Yes.
And she is your booking agent and your manager. What's that dynamic look like?
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, Priscilla is amazing, and we're both musicians. So, you know, to hit this phase of my life and my career and have someone beside me who gets it is incredible. I remember when I'm going to divert a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
When we were dating, I was trying to get a picture of who she was and how she would handle things. I'm pretty low-key myself, but when I'm doing performances and gigs, you know, oftentimes there's, you know, the fans want FaceTime with you and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I had brought her to a big jazz festival that I played at, and we got done, and you know, they were waiting in line for me to sign CDs and take pictures, and I mean, she just hopped right up there, and she was grabbing their CDs and helping them unwrap them, and she was grabbing their cameras and taking pictures, and she was not jealous, and she was not weird.
Yeah.
She was just cool.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, she knows how to handle herself in these situations. Right. And so we talked about some booking and management, and I mean, she's such a go-getter.
Yeah, she is.
And she's incredibly capable. And, you know, what's that old TV commercial? Was it the Army? We do more before 5 a.m. than you do in your whole day.
Right.
That's like her.
Yeah.
I mean, she fits more into one day than I do into 3 or 4 days.
Right. And for anyone out there who hasn't caught it yet, his wife is Priscilla Rahn. We've had her on the show.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So
if you want somebody on your side,
she's the one to have.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we started working together, but it's a team. It's a teamwork. I mean, I still manage a lot of the things that come into the studio. Those clients are paying for FaceTime with me, and so so generally I'll field a lot of that stuff. If it's outside inquiries, interviews, we'll get set up with you. You know, gigs, stuff like that. We'll filter those through the management link on my site, and that goes straight to Priscilla.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she's been involved in just about every aspect.
Now, this is a side story you and I had talked about, and so she's a musician. She does a lot of other things too, and she's now your booking agent and manager. Was she impressed when you told her you had a recording studio? Why don't you tell us that story? That's a cool story. Because everybody has a recording studio now, right? I mean,
everyone's a producer.
Yeah,
everyone has. Yeah, and you know, I've just been in my studio working for so many years. I never thought about it. So even when I was, you know, when I was dating and we were spending time together, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a saxophonist. I'm a music producer.
Yeah.
And I'm not really thinking anything of that, but I guess, and then, you know, you know, I'm self-employed. I didn't realize that, I guess in today's day and age, self-employed means broke.
Right.
I didn't know this.
Right.
But so, you know, she's like, well, okay, so you're a producer. Uh-huh.
Right.
And she's like, and she told me the story afterwards. In her mind, she was like, yeah, you probably have a, you know, a laptop, and a pair of headphones, and maybe a little keyboard down in your basement.
Yeah, like an octave and a half.
So she was scoping, she was checking, she was doing her research. That's the kind of person she is. So we'd been dating for a little bit, and she came over to my house, and she said, oh yeah, you said you're a producer, you have a studio. I said, yeah, I have a studio downstairs. So I took her downstairs, and then it was a game changer, not because of accomplishment or anything like that, but she realized, oh, okay, yeah, this is not like, it's for real.
Yeah.
It's for real.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you weren't making stuff up. You actually did it.
So
yeah.
I guess I passed the test, we should say.
In your studio, do you have, did you convert a bunch of space into a tiny bunch of rooms, or how do you approach your recording studio? There's so many different ways to approach studios and production.
Yeah, I guess it's about 1,000 square foot. So I've got a little live room for recording that most everything's recorded in. I have a control room, and then I've got a couple other smaller rooms that I can use in different capacities. But you know, for me, I wanted to set up recording and production in a way that would really stimulate creativity. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that we are against as musicians, you walk into a studio, and man, when I was coming up out of college and into my professional career, you know, it was for a reputable studio with a reputable engineer. I mean, it was $1,000 to $2,000 a day. Mm. Actually, no, closer to $2,000 by the time you factor in tape, engineer, assistant engineer, and the facility. You were almost $2,000 a day just for studio time. Yeah. And so
almost unachievable for most people.
Yeah, and even my first record, I remember being so constrained because the budget could only buy so much time. Yeah. And I just remember that feeling of always being up against the clock and worried about the clock and worried about the hourly rate, when what I should be worried about is the music. Yeah. And so when I set up my studio and my production business, the whole notion was to set it up to where clients wouldn't have to worry about the clock. So more often than not, I'm doing stuff on an all-in rate, and the environment is very comfortable. Yeah. No pressure. Let's just.
You feel like you're getting great results that way?
I think that's the way to get best results, because then people are relaxed and they're themselves and they're having fun, you know, and you're not rushing them. Right. So.
You ever find you have artists that don't put in the work because of that? Like they go in and they go, well, you know, we're not paying by the hour, so we don't need to push.
You know, I'm a hard worker, and I tend to scope my clients pretty. I can kind of see a poser, right, when they come at me, and if that's the case, chances are we're probably not going to work together, because my work ethic, you know, I'm all about excellence and getting things done, and I want to work with people that want that same thing. Yeah. Yeah. You know, people who, if it's just about them and it's not about the music, then we're probably not going to be a good match.
And you can get that pretty quickly just by chatting with them and knowing what they're looking for.
Yeah, I can even read sometimes just the initial email or something that someone else send me, and you know, I'm happy to listen, happy to chat. Yeah. But I can usually see it before we even talk. Yeah.
Well, that's good though, because that way you're not wasting any time in your studio. Because you want to work on good stuff.
That kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier about, you know, star power and being. I've never just really been impressed with that kind of stuff. So what impresses me is good character, good work ethic, you know, and getting work done well. Yeah. You know, and working well together. Yeah. You know.
Well, yeah, that's a huge part of it. We talked about that a little bit too, about how, you know, creating an environment where you feel like you want to be there. Yeah. You know, because if you don't want to be there, it's gonna show in your work.
Exactly.
Yeah. You are a session player, a solo artist, a songwriter. I've written all this down. Oh, wow. A producer, an engineer, and you mentioned earlier you consider yourself kind of on equal parts between producer and artist. If someone were to come up to you, what do you tell them? I'm a producer and artist. Do you say I'm an artist? What just pops out of your mouth when somebody asks?
Musician.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll say it depends who I'm talking to.
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and you're doing it all, so none of them are a wrong answer.
No. But I would say, but what I will often tell people, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you're so lucky, you get to do music full time. You know, and well, I work, I'm a teacher, and then I gig when I can. And I said, you know, you might be doing music full time too, or your career allows you to do music.
Yeah.
So for me, the production has been my bread and butter. Yeah, there's definitely income from the artist side, but being a producer allows me not have to be a typical struggling artist.
Right. Right.
So I've managed to try to diversify my career and have these different angles. So it gives me different points of earning.
Yeah.
So that I'm not relying on one thing. But the producer, mixing, engineering, recording, writing, that stuff really provides a really solid base. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's hard to separate them because they're kind of all involved. But I think the production and the mixing, mastering, engineering allows me the freedom to do the kind of music I want to do as an artist.
Right, right. And that's, you know, that leads me to this next question, and that is, because the industry is what it is, you and I had talked about almost every musician now is an independent. Mm-hmm. And an independent, you know, their own label or another independent label, yeah, or those types of things, mm-hmm, and how, you know, the major label stuff isn't, it was never common anyway, but now it's really not common.
Yeah.
What would you say to anyone who's kind of approaching things the way you are anywhere, but especially in Colorado, because Colorado is a unique scene.
Sure.
Seems like there's tons of talent, and a lot of people don't know there's tons of talent, mm-hmm, in Colorado, which is kind of, I don't know why that is. But so what would you say to them, you know, especially you're talking about diversifying and being able to do everything that needs to be done?
Well, I think, you know, oftentimes as musicians, there's this grass is greener mentality. Mm-hmm. You know, if I could just get signed to a label. Right. Well, really, those days are over. Budgets, short of big pop records, pop music, big country records, short of these things, it doesn't really exist that way anymore. Most labels are offering, you know, the artist is paying to do the record, right, and then the label's taking half of everything after they recoup, which they may never show, yeah, recoupment. Yeah. So I think that no one is more capable of presenting yourself in the way that you think you ought to be seen more than yourself. Right. And now, I'm not encouraging people to be narcissistic.
Sure, yeah.
But if you have that dream in your heart and you kind of know how you want things to look and sound, then just try to do that excellently. Mm-hmm. No, don't be the local guy that walks around for 25 years with like the mixtape in his back pocket with a raggedy looking label on it. Do it right. Right. Yeah, have it in your back pocket, but make sure it looks good. Make sure it shouldn't sound local. It shouldn't sound like Denver, so to speak, or insert name of city here. Right. You know, yeah, when people think of, you know, the big time, they're thinking of, oh man, it's record label in LA, or yeah, there's hip hop label out of New York, and mm-hmm, man, did you hear that record? Okay, well, how about you put that record beside your record and don't stop until your record sounds that good. Right. And if it doesn't sound that good, you got homework to do. Yeah. Budgets aren't there today. Even big records, I mean, pop records, big name people, it's not what it once was. There used, yeah, to be hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars on a budget. You know, I have artists that I used to work with that had, you know, a few $100,000 to do a record. And now, today, they might have 25 grand, and they're a big name. Wow. You know, 25, 30 grand.
And prices haven't gone down for studio time, so that, you know, makes it even a bigger difference.
So, yeah, but technology, the tools are at our fingertips now. and they weren't there 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So now, if you take the time to do your homework, you can also save yourself a lot of money. But learn to do it right. You know, don't settle for sounding good.
Right.
You know, don't stop until your stuff sounds as good or better than the stuff that that really turns your crank.
Yeah. Did you find that you learned that pretty quickly because of how things worked and because of just, I mean, right out of the gate you approached it differently. You weren't wanting to become Elvis.
You know, I had to. When I got that first job with Wayman, they had called 2 or 3 other producers to submit music for that, and these other producers were my heroes, guys that I looked up to, guys whose music was my favorite music. And the records, I would always listen to the records those guys did, and they had submitted music for Wayman as well. And I remember the label saying, hey, you know, so-and-so submitted music, and it was the wrong style. Someone else submitted it, and we didn't like it. Someone else submitted it, and they can't make it happen fast enough. Someone else submitted it, and they're charging way too much. And so now here I am on this first big gig, needing to deliver at that level. Now these other guys all had extremely well-equipped studios, acoustically treated, high-end analog gear.
Right.
And I had, you know, a computer and some modest converters and one good mic and one good preamp, and here I was needing to compete.
Yeah.
And there was no excuses. You know, major label, it has to sound as good as the other stuff on the record.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's always a way. If you're willing to put in the time, there's always a way.
Yeah. Is that how you approach everything? Do you feel
a lot of things? Yeah. I learned that from my woodshop teacher in high school. I was in a tiny little country town, and we were going to go to state woodworking competition, and we were also building a project for a group that I was in at school, and we needed to build something, and we didn't have the tools in the wood shop that you would typically use to do this. And our teacher made us, about 3 or 4 weeks, he just said, you go home, think about it. Think about how we're going to do this. He said, there's always a way with what you have. And so we spent 3 or 4 weeks thinking out, and we all put our heads together, and by the end of that 3 or 4 weeks we had figured out, with his guidance,
right,
we had figured out a way to do this without the tool that you would normally use it, and that was a huge lesson. It's the same thing in music. We always have the basic, you can always do it with what you have. You know, it may require some rethinking,
right,
or some restructuring,
right.
And maybe that big masterpiece of a record that you have in your mind, maybe something on that scope has to wait a little longer.
Right.
But you can take your vision and your music that you want to get out to people, and the message that you need to get out, and you can do it with what you have.
That's cool. That's good information for people to hear, because I know a lot of people get frustrated really easy. Mm-hmm. They're not, you know, how come I spent all this time on this, and, you know, my mom and my brother bought it and that's it, you know. And,
the music industry is not for the faint of heart.
No, yeah, it's tough.
But when you put out something that's quality and you feel great about it, you know, whether it sells 2 copies or whether it sells 200,000 copies, you know, you can put your head on a pillow at night and be thankful and happy and proud of it.
Yeah, very cool. Darren, thanks for coming up.
That's my pleasure.
This was cool. And you're always welcome back.
I'd love to come back.
Yeah, it'd be cool to have you back and talk production more. That sounds like you've got some really cool approaches. So thanks so much.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
You bet. You bet. Folks, make sure you stick around. We'll be playing some of Darren's stuff while the credits roll. We'll have his links and connections and all that stuff up there, and you can buy some of his stuff. It's great stuff. Make sure you like, you share, you subscribe, support these guys that we have on here. So important to lift everybody up. So I'm Michael Hartsock. Thanks for watching Futurartist Records Presents.